Good morning and welcome to January's frigid, at least in Iowa, EMS training. The call report, there are numerous reports and numbers of fields that are available not only on the call report, but on lots of other reports. The call report is just one of a wide range of reports that are available within Respond Billing, and the call report can help you customize and compile information. You can analyze efficiencies, predict trends, and you can also calculate some financials. Many of our reports share very similar fields, meaning filters and options, and they serve the same purpose throughout many of the different reports. One really important distinction to make when you're using reports is the difference between the filters, such as basic filters, standard filters, advanced filters, flexible filters, and options, detail option or summary option. The filters involve the process in which you are choosing which data you would like to include in the report. The options are only concerned with how that data will be printed, so how it will look when it's printed. So again, we have basic filters, standard filters, advanced filters, flexible filters, which are going to allow you to choose which data you want to see on your report, and then your options that are going to allow you to choose how that data looks. When you're using the filters, it's really important to fully understand the correlation between the number of filters that you choose and your report's outcome. So for example, if you use a call date range filter and a current payer filter, then the report's going to include all the records whose call date fall within the specified call date range and the specified payer. However, if you increased the number of filters, you may get a message that says no data to display, try an expanded search with less filtering. This is a common mistake, and it really just means that you've over-filtered. So maybe you picked a date range or an amount or something that wasn't there. So let's get started. After polling some of our billing users and some of our trainers, I've compiled a list of 10 popular reports that are commonly ran using the call report. So in no specific order, but these 10 are ones that people have told me that they utilize on a daily basis. The first one has to do with calls that you would import. Under the Save Load settings, I am going to grab an already pre-existing parameter called Fusion Import Calls. These could be calls, in this case, that were imported from Fusion EPCR, but you might have a parameter that says imported calls if you're importing from another EPCR vendor. In this case, I am looking at a detail report. And on the Basic Filters tab, because I want to see all calls that are sitting in one schedule, which would be an import or an upload type schedule, I am leaving all of my filters on the Basic Filters tab blank except for picking my current schedule. The schedule I'm concerned about for an import or an upload type schedule would be just that, an upload from Fusion EPCR or imported from another vendor. The call balance we would ignore as well, and I haven't filtered on anything else. In my detail options, I have chosen to group by the schedule that these calls are in, knowing that they're all going to be in one. And when I would run this report, then I would see any calls that have been uploaded into my program that are still sitting in that schedule and have not been worked. Some of you may use this as the starting place every day so you know which calls you need to work. Some of you may use Easy Review to take you into each individual call so you don't have to get out that piece of paper and pencil and the ruler and mark off the calls as you've worked them. Others may use this report at the end of the day to make sure that they've worked all of those calls that they thought had been imported in. So again, this report is very useful to find those calls that have been imported into your billing program from an external system. The next report that I'm going to talk about is a report that I like to run when I'm doing a billing checkup. And this report is called the No Bill Sent Yet report. Remember when we talk about our billing schedules, many of those schedules start with the first event called No Bill Sent Yet. And to ensure that we don't have calls that are stuck or are waiting for something to happen, from time to time, it makes sense to run that no bill sent report just to make sure that you don't have something that's sitting out there that you haven't worked. In this case, I've chosen to run a summary report first. And on the Basic Filters tab, again, I'm looking at just one event, no date range, and the event is no bill sent yet. Again, ignoring the balance specifications. On my summary options, I like to look at the current schedule that those calls are in. So if I see a problem, I can go look at those schedules and look a little bit deeper. So again, if I run this report, as you can see, it looks like in this program there would be a problem in my Medicaid paper schedule because I have 174 claims sitting in Medicaid paper and nothing's happened to them. I have 25 in insurance primary and 25 in insurance secondary. So I would want to go into those and make sure that there's actually a form or find out what's going on with that. A lot of times when people run this report, they get the results here on this summary and then they call support to try and help them figure out what's going on. So again, that report is called our No Bill Sent report. Of course, just as important of a report to run would be a report to look at our credit balances. Credit balances meaning those calls that we probably need to refund someone. To look at credit balances, again, we're not filtering on very much. Here in our call balance specification, I have looked at calls that have a balance below 0. When I run that report, then it pulls up any calls that have a balance below 0, meaning there was an overpayment, and I can go investigate who needs to have that refund made to them. So again, this is the credit balance report. It shows any call that has a balance that needs to be refunded back to the payer. One of our reports that is a very important report to run on a weekly basis would be a follow-up report or a review for collection action report. And the follow-up report and the follow-up needed report allows you to look at all of those calls that have fallen into that safety net and need to be followed up or need to be reviewed. If I pull up the one that's called follow-up needed in this database, notice it's both a detail and a summary report. The current events in here then are those follow-ups. So follow-up with Medicare, follow-up with Medicaid, follow-up with Railroad Medicare. It's time to review for a PCS or time to review. So in this case, I'm looking at everything that's above 0 that happens to be sitting in one of those events. On my detail options, I'm looking at who owes me the money. So if I'm going to be making a phone call to the payers and I have a multiple calls for one payer, I can ask about those calls within one phone call. And so when I run this report, again, this is a sample database, you can see that I have 5 calls that Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Dakota owe me money on. So if these were all within timely filing, I could take a look at those calls and make one phone call to Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Dakota because they're in the review event. They've passed the time that I set forth for them to get paid. Much like the follow-up needed, we also have a review for collections. In the review for collections, we're looking at those that are sitting in a consider for collections. Typically, this consider for collections event is part of a private pay schedule. So consider for collections. Maybe we've went through sending out our 4 invoices and we haven't gotten paid, so now we need to consider sending them to collections. So that's what we're looking for here in this report. Again, we're looking at one event and a balance above 0. And when we run this report, then we see our 2 pages, and then these are the calls and the patients that are sitting in the consider for collections. Some of you have these reports combined, your review for collection action and your follow-up, and you just have all of them put in one report, and that's perfectly fine. The important part is that you're actually running a report on a very consistent basis, looking at those calls that need a review and need a follow-up. Another way to use the call report is to get a summary of year-to-date calls. And so if I look at this year's system summary, which I have set up, again, notice it's a summary report, and it has to do with the call date entered. So how many calls have we put in this year-to-date? And because I have it memorized this year-to-date, I won't ever have to change the date range. It's always going to know to start at January 1st this year and go to today's date. Again, I'm not filtering on anything else. I've ignored the balance specification, and I'm looking to see what schedule these calls are in. And so when I run this report, I can see this year to date. In this sample database, we have 3 calls that have been entered. One's in the insurance primary schedule, and 2 are in the Medicare electronic schedule. We also have the ability to look at the level of care that was provided on a call based on utilizing the level of care field. We could look at calls this year to date as a call date, and we could go to our summary options and say, show me the level of care. And I'm going to look at the level of care by description. Remember that the level of care is an optional field on the Unit and Crew tab. So for those of you that have it turned on and are answering it, this report works wonderfully for you. And notice this shows me then in the date range I chose, I have 1 ALS emergency, 1 BLS emergency, and 1 call that was a treat, no transport. So very quickly I can see the level of care that was provided on the calls if I'm utilizing that level of care field. We also can see the number of calls where a primary payer is something. Again, so if we wanted to say, show me this year to date, those calls where the primary payer is, and we can uncheck the no filter. I'm going to say, show me where the primary payer is Medicare. On my detail options, I can filter by primary payer, or I could leave it wide open and run my report. And this shows me that I have 2 calls this year to date. It shows me the call number, the patient number, the patient name, the call date, the current payer, charges, credits, and balance. And again, these are calls where the primary payer is something. Maybe some of you do quality assurance or some QA from the billing program, and you want to see all the calls that had a level of care of something, maybe level of care of non-emergency, that were picked up at a hospital. So you can make sure that these are coded appropriately. So we can come into our flexible filters and choose our pickup location. And I'm going to say, show me all of those that were picked up at my Avera St. Luke's Hospital, because that's my most popular hospital. And my basic filters, I can choose a date range. So maybe I'm going to choose a date range of last year through today. So again, the goal of this report is to look at a year's worth of data. I'm going to look at a detailed report starting on January 1st, 2015. I'm looking for all of those calls that had a level of care of BLS non-emergency that had a pickup location of one hospital. Yay, good news, I don't have any calls that fit that criteria. And if I had multiple hospitals, I could certainly add those hospitals in to see if I had any calls that fit that criteria. And I don't. If I did, what I would want to be doing then is going into those calls that would show up on my report to make sure that they met that criteria. Maybe I want to change my level of care to an emergency call. So I can see if I had any that were marked as an emergency call. If I had those, then I would know to go into those calls and look to make sure that they were marked appropriately as an emergency, and if not, did I have a physician certification statement? So a way to do some QA within the program. Another report that many of you may already have set up in your program might be the schedule event summary. We kind of call it climb up on the ladder, sort of a way to check lots of different information in the program. And I'm going to do a couple of years worth of call date ranges in here. This is on my summary options, and in this case I'm going to choose my current schedule, and I'm going to say show me all the events, and this is the one place where we would use that schedule event summary. And what this is going to show us is based on the calls that have balances in the program. I think that's what I filtered on, where they're sitting in the schedules. So we can see in our private pay we have 2 calls sitting in our no bill sent yet. In our Medicare we have 6 calls sitting in the no bill sent yet. So we continue down here in our Medicare paper claim. We have 1 call sitting in our follow-up with Medicare. So we continue down in our insurance primary. We have 1 call in no bill sent yet and 1 call in our insurance 1500 printed. So this schedule event summary shows us where in each of our schedules our calls are sitting. And the last call report that we're going to talk about today is one of the services we provide here at TriTech, and a lot of our customers take advantage of this, is they ask us to help them move old calls into one schedule and then write them off in a great big write-off. And so a lot of times what we'll help them do is figure out, well, how many calls do you have that fits that criteria? So we may start at the call date from the beginning of time and go through a certain date. So maybe we're going to leave 10 years worth of calls on the books. So we would go through 2006, 12/31/2006, or 2005. And we would want to see all of the calls with a balance above 0. And we can see what schedule those calls are living in. And when we run this report, then what it's going to show us is how many calls fit that time frame, that criteria. So in this database, we have 552 calls for approximately $580,000 that, if we so chose, we could write off our books because they would be considered uncollectible. Then they're over 10 years old and we want to get them off our books. Remembering, when you keep those old calls on your books, they do affect what your aging report looks like, your accounts receivable. And so if you have a board of directors or management that are trying to do budgeting and make decisions off of that AR. Sometimes you like to get a truer AR. We do have some customers that actually have us help them write off all the calls up in, including like 2 years worth of calls they leave on the books. Now maybe their private pays they leave a little bit longer, or those at collections, because they're at collections they don't write off. But that is one way to help you find those old calls, ones that are past timely filing. You can take that to another level and you can say, well, show me those calls that the current payer or the primary payer was Medicare, because we know that Medicare has some pretty stringent timely filing rules above 0 and that have a call date there we go, before 12/31/14. Oh, I got dyslexic. There we go. So here we can see how many calls I have that don't fit that criteria. So in theory, these calls then don't meet timely filing, and I would want to be writing those off as well. So a recap of those top 10 reports that we talked about. We talked about our imported calls, calls sitting in a no bill sent yet event, those calls sitting in a follow-up or a review event, those calls with a credit balance, a year-to-date summary of the calls, either the calls that have happened or the calls as they've been entered. The call report can look at the level of care provided, calls where we have a primary payer and you'd like to look at a specific primary payer, all the calls that were picked up at a specific location, perhaps a hospital. We talked about the schedule event summary, also called Climb Up on the Ladder. We can see where our calls are based on the billing schedule and which event they're in. And last but not least, our old calls, those calls past timely filing that you might want to write off or have us help you do a mass write-off. I would like to thank you all for participating in today's coffee training session. And again, stay warm. It's 20 below 0 wind chill here in Iowa. Have a great day.